Chapter 2208. I thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was not going to participate in the competition of the Four Palaces. I didn't expect her to appear today. Although Bailey Hongzhuang is a disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she comes and goes without trace. I haven't seen her many times in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang is the future wife of the young sect master. This matter is already set in stone. I think even the sect master has agreed. If I were Bailey Hongzhuang, then I would enjoy the resources of the sect. Why would I work so hard to participate in the competition of the Four Palaces? A group of female cultivators felt a strong sense of incomprehension towards Bailey Hongzhuang's behavior. The reason why they worked hard to cultivate was that they could only get sufficient resources after their strength was improved. They may also have a better life in the future. As for Bailey Hongzhuang, she was now a sparrow that had turned into a phoenix. There was no need for her to work so hard. What's more, if she didn't perform well in the competition of the Four Palaces, it would have a bad impact on her. Xiaojiqing and Bai Junyu listened to the thoughts of these female disciples and suddenly understood why these guys didn't have the opportunity to become a carp that jumped over the dragon's gate. Just this kind of thinking was already impossible. Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun never had any dependent relationship between them. They were equal. After Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the stone room, she found that the stone room was unexpectedly spacious. There were several disciples lining up inside. After Qin Ai saw Bailey Hongzhuang appear, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. He was still worried that Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't appear today. If he forcibly left a spot for Bailey Hongzhuang, it would lead to criticism from the disciples. As the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall master, even if the disciples criticized him, it wouldn't have any impact on him. However, after participating in the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang finally had a certain amount of fame. If she was criticized again because of this matter, it was tantamount to returning to the past. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Qin Ai smile, she also bowed slightly. Every time she saw Qin Ai, she could feel Qin Ai's goodwill. In the process of waiting, Bailey Hongzhuang discovered that the disciples in the queue all walked towards the Brotherhood statue behind Qin Ai after obtaining permission. It was as if, according to the performance of the cultivator, the apparatus would give a corresponding grade. It was divided into 4 levels: heaven, earth, black, and yellow. Among them, heaven was the strongest and yellow was the weakest. If the disciples' grade was only the yellow grade, then they would definitely not be qualified. If it was the Xian rank, there might be a chance, but the chances were slim. If he reached the earth rank, the possibility of obtaining a spot would be very high. As for obtaining the heaven rank, that was definitely not a problem. Bailey Hongzhuang watched as one disciple after another came out of the apparatus. Most of the disciples were of the Xian grade, and occasionally there would be an earth grade. Once an earth-ranked disciple appeared, Qin Ai would record this disciple's name. It's really too difficult to obtain a spot. I don't know how this place determines the qualifications. Although my strength has reached the 5th level of the Green Realm, I don't think it's possible. There are so many disciples in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. There are only 20 spots in total. It's definitely extremely difficult to obtain a spot. Chapter 2209. Since you're just going through the motions, what are you doing here? What if there's a problem with the apparatus? Or what if my talent isn't tested? Wouldn't it be a waste? Besides, it's good to be recognized by the palace master. One of the disciples smiled. As soon as these words were spoken, many of the disciples present nodded in agreement. Many of them knew that they had no hope of passing the test. However, they still wanted to get lucky. Green Realm Level 5. This was a pretty good cultivation. If the palace master could remember them, it would be a good result. After waiting for the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, it was Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to go in for the test. Do your best to display your strength. Hold on for as long as you can. Qin Ai smiled at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang bowed slightly. Thank you for your guidance, Palace Master. When the crowd saw Qin Ai's kind attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang, they were envious. This was the difference between them. So many disciples had participated in the test, but the Palace Master had never told any of them. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to receive the palace master's guidance the moment she arrived. Although everyone knew about this, they were still envious. Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the apparatus. The door of the apparatus was closed, and no one outside could see what was happening inside. However, when the cultivator left the apparatus, the top of the apparatus would display the cultivator's previous performance. This was the first time Bailey Hongzhuang had seen such an apparatus. She had no idea what kind of test she would face once she entered. However, since Palace Master Qin had reminded her to hold on for as long as she would hold on for as long as she could. As Bailey Hongzhuang walked into the apparatus and the door closed, the apparatus attacked her rapidly. In an instant, it was as if countless hands had appeared in the apparatus and attacked Bailey Hongzhuang. Every fist was filled with powerful force. Once it landed on the cultivator's body, it would be unbearable. The range of this device was very small, so the cultivator's range was also very small. They could only passively receive these attacks. Bailey Hongzhuang's reaction speed was very fast. After seeing the attack coming, she quickly blocked it. Today, her shape-shifting technique has reached the completion stage. Her body was like the wind, ethereal and formless. Fulgurating transposition was a very high-level movement technique, and its ability to dodge was even more impressive. Therefore, even though the range of the device was very small, Bailey Hongzhuang's dodging ability was still extremely shocking. If the cultivators could see the situation in the apparatus, they would definitely be amazed by Bailey Hongzhuang's dodging ability. This was because they could only see a figure changing rapidly like the wind in the device. They could not see its real movements at all. Bailey Hongzhuang's current cultivation was no longer the same as before, and her combat ability had also improved greatly. If it were her in the past, she probably wouldn't have been able to hold on for long. As the time Bailey Hongzhuang spent inside increased, the number and strength of the punches increased. Chapter 22:10. After Bailey Hongzhuang entered the apparatus, the disciples who were waiting at the back all paid close attention to the situation of the apparatus. For an influential figure like Bailey Hongzhuang, her results had always attracted attention. I wonder how long Bailey Hongzhuang can last and what level she has reached. I only know that her alchemy skills are extremely powerful, and she was the champion of the assessment competition. However, I have never seen her true abilities and have no idea at all. I feel that since Bailey Hongzhuang's alchemy skills are so powerful, her cultivation shouldn't be that strong. As the disciples' voice faded, the disciples present all nodded their heads. Alchemists were not powerful enough, and this was something that everyone knew. This was because alchemists put all their energy into alchemy and would not spend any more time on cultivation. After hearing the disciples' thoughts, a smile appeared in the depths of Qin Ai's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang was the granddaughter of the sect leader, and this was not something that could be explained by common sense. Being the champion of the assessment competition was enough to prove how powerful Bailey Hongzhuang was. Ever since Bailey Hongzhuang came to Tiangang's sect, she had always been elusive, and he was not sure what level of cultivation Bailey Hongzhuang was at. However, he believed that Bailey Hongzhuang's abilities would not disappoint him. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect leader, who was a cultivation maniac, were together. Presumably, both of them were cultivation maniacs. As Bailey Hongzhuang stayed in the apparatus for a longer period of time, the disciples' expressions changed. Bailey Hongzhuang has been in there for a long time. Why hasn't she appeared until now? I don't know. Isn't this apparatus used to determine a cultivator's talent level based on the length of time they stay in there? Bailey Hongzhuang can actually stay in there for so long. Isn't this too strange? Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang has some special method to stay in there, and we don't know about it? The Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples were confused. Before this, they had seen many cultivators take the test, but they had never seen a disciple who could stay in there for such a long period of time. The longer the time, the more shocked the disciples became. I remember that disciple who had reached the earth rank had stayed in there for so long. He should have come out by now. A disciple could not help but ask. This time was a little too long. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang has really reached the Earth rank. After all, the cultivation resources that she has are incomparable to ours. It's not strange for her to reach this level. Another disciple voiced his opinion. Come on the path of cultivation, other than the cultivator's own talent and hard work, resources also played a large role. That being said, the disciple still felt sour grapes when he spoke. When Qin AI saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had not come out after such a long time, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. It looked like Bailey Hongzhuang had not disappointed him. To be able to stay in the apparatus for so long proved that Bailey Hongzhuang had reached the Earth rank. This kind of ability was enough to take part in the competition of the four palaces. Although Qin AI could not be certain whether Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to perform well in the competition of the four palaces. Chapter 2211. Qin AI's gaze landed on the apparatus. It was about time for Bailey Hongzhuang to come out. However, after waiting for a while, Qin AI saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had yet to appear, and his expression instantly became interesting. This time was a little too long. The time for Earth grade had already been reached. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to reach Heaven grade? When this thought surfaced in Qin AI's mind, even he himself felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. Heaven grade. Such a grade was extremely rare to appear. When Qin AI made such a guess, the expressions of the Tiangang sect disciples became even more interesting. They had never seen it for such a long time. Bailey Hongzhuang actually stayed for so long and still hasn't come out. She couldn't have been knocked unconscious inside, right? When a cultivator voiced out his conjecture, the other disciples were also stunned. Speaking of which, such a situation had happened before. The attacks within the apparatus had always been very powerful. If one was not careful and was hit in a vital point, it was very likely that one would faint. Once the cultivator who entered the apparatus fainted, the apparatus would stop attacking. Back then, there was a disciple who fainted forcefully. Everyone waited outside the apparatus for a long time, but there were no signs of her appearing. In the end, even the higher-ups were shocked. Everyone thought that a shocking genius had appeared in the sect. Who would have thought that the so-called genius was carried out in the end and had already fainted? It was really laughable. This story was very widespread in Tiangang sect. Later on, such a thing had also happened before. This is really hard to say. If Bailey Hongzhuang really fainted in the apparatus, it would be a big joke. Although from a certain point of view, the disciples did not believe that Bailey Hongzhuang would faint in the apparatus. However, if Bailey Hongzhuang did not faint, then Bailey Hongzhuang's grade would be close to Heaven grade. Between these two possibilities, everyone obviously believed in the former more. This was because the latter possibility was simply too unbelievable. Palace Master, should we check on Bailey Hongzhuang's situation? The elder beside Qin AI could not help but suggest. They were well aware of the power of this instrument. Bailey Hongzhuang was young, and she was also an alchemist. It was hard to believe that she could persist for so long. If Bailey Hongzhuang was really unconscious, they had to rescue Bailey Hongzhuang as soon as possible. Once Bailey Hongzhuang's vital parts were injured, it wouldn't be good for Bailey Hongzhuang for too long. Qin AI frowned. He had never thought of such a possibility before. Now, as time passed, he was starting to worry. For so long, he had never understood Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, so he could not determine the result. In an instant, all the disciples' gazes landed on Qin AI. They did not know what decision the palace master would make. Let's wait for a while. Qin AI muttered. He believed in Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. If Bailey Hongzhuang was really still persevering, wouldn't they destroy Bailey Hongzhuang's results if they turned on the apparatus now? After hearing Qin AI's decision, the disciples could not help but sigh. They did not expect the palace master to have such high hopes for Bailey Hongzhuang. It was really unexpected. Chapter 2212. Time continued to pass. After waiting for a while, Qin AI noticed that Bailey Hongzhuang still had not emerged from the apparatus. His expression instantly turned into an ugly shade. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang's luck was really so bad that she had been struck in a vital spot by an attack from the apparatus and had fallen unconscious? This length of time had exceeded his expectations. Based on Bailey Hongzhuang's level of power, she should not have been able to hold on for such a long time. Palace Lord, let's open the door of the apparatus and take a look. The elder could not help but remind him. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really met with an accident in the apparatus, it would be a disaster. Hearing this, Qin AI thought for a moment before nodding his head. Bailey Hongzhuang's status was extremely noble. If she had met with any danger and was not treated in time, he would not have the face to face the sect master. Then, Qin AI and the elder walked towards the apparatus. They had ascertained that Bailey Hongzhuang was safe. When the cultivators who were watching from the sidelines saw Qin AI's actions, their eyes lit up. It seems that the Palace Lord also believes that something has happened to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang has definitely fainted in there. If this news were to spread, it would be a major piece of news. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really fainted, I'm afraid that she would not be able to obtain a place in the competition of the four palaces. Speaking of which, it would be rather embarrassing. Bailey Hongzhuang is a genius pill master. She should just focus on refining pills. There's no need for her to fight with us for such a small number of places in the competition. The disciples were delighted to see this. With one less competitor, their chances of obtaining a place in the competition would increase. This was undoubtedly the best outcome. Just as Qin AI and the elder were about to open the door to the apparatus, a voice suddenly rang out. Then, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, Bailey Hongzhuang opened the door to the apparatus and walked out. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Qin AI and the elders standing outside the door of the instrument, her face couldn't help but be filled with doubt. Hall Master, elders, what are you doing? Previously, when the disciples were taking the test, the palace master and the elders were standing at a relatively far place. Why were they suddenly here now? Upon hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Qin AI and the elders' expressions froze for a moment. Soon after, they revealed somewhat embarrassed smiles. From the looks of it, Bailey Hongzhuang did not faint in the machine. Bailey Hongzhuang, did you just finish the test? The elder couldn't help but ask. He still couldn't believe that Bailey Hongzhuang had stayed in the device for so long that it was hard to believe. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and said matter-of-factly, yes. When the disciples saw Bailey Hongzhuang's reaction, they couldn't help but look at each other. Was Bailey Hongzhuang telling the truth? This must be fake, right? How could Bailey Hongzhuang have lasted for such a long time in the machine? Do you think it's possible that Bailey Hongzhuang fainted first, but soon woke up again, so she came out? After all, if she had really fainted in the machine, that would be an extremely embarrassing thing. She would never admit to it. What you said makes sense. That's very likely the case. The disciples nodded and confirmed this guess. Chapter 22:13. Qin AI sized up Bailey Hongzhuang for a moment, but did not say anything. He was also unable to fathom the situation in which Bailey Hongzhuang had entered the apparatus. Bailey Hongzhuang, who initially did not understand what had happened, suddenly understood after hearing the disciples' words. So, everyone had thought that she had fainted in the apparatus? The attacks in the apparatus were very concentrated and strong. It was not easy for her to deal with them. However, she had always kept Qin AI's words in mind, so she tried her best to hold on for as long as she could. After all, she was determined to win the quota for the competition of the four palaces. She could not just hand it over to someone else. Hence, she had given it her all in the apparatus. As long as she could hold on for a long enough time, she would be able to win the quota without any dispute. As for how long she had been in there, Bailey Hongzhuang was not sure either. She had placed all her attention on dealing with the attacks and did not notice the passing of time. Bailey Hongzhuang, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Qin AI thought for a moment and decided to ask. He knew the power of the apparatus very well. If Bailey Hongzhuang had really stayed in there for such a long time, the attacks and power she had to endure would be very terrifying. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head gently and smiled. Thank you for your concern, Palace Master. I'm fine. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's reply, everyone in the stone room had a strange expression on their faces. In the next moment, a clear and large word appeared on the apparatus. However, when the crowd saw the contents clearly, the disciples present could not help but gasp. Even Qin AI and the elder were surprised when they saw the two words written on it. They never thought that it would really end up like this. Heaven grade. It was a simple word, but it blinded the eyes of all the disciples present. Damn it, am I seeing things? Is that the heaven grade? Is it really the two words heaven grade? You're not seeing things. I saw those two words too. How long has it been since I've seen a cultivator who has reached the heaven grade? Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang an alchemist? Who can tell me why an alchemist can reach heaven's stage? Don't stop me. I want some peace and quiet. The disciples didn't know what to say. This level proved that Bailey Hongzhuang hadn't fainted in the device. She had been holding on until now. Qin AI's eyes instantly lit up. He had long expected that Bailey Hongzhuang's powers would not be weak. However, he never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually be able to reach the heaven stage. This result was enough for Bailey Hongzhuang to get a place in the competition. Bailey Hongzhuang, you've given me a huge surprise. Qin AI did not hide his admiration and optimism. Previously, during the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had already given him a surprise. He did not expect that this time, Bailey Hongzhuang would give him an even bigger surprise. Even in the four palaces, there weren't many cultivators who had reached the heaven grade. This time, perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to bring glory to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall in the competition of the four palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Her smile was elegant and beautiful. Palace Master, you flatter me. Qin AI and the Palace Master next to him looked at each other, and a smile appeared in their eyes. Chapter 22:14. If their results in the competition of the four palaces were too poor, then as Palace Masters and Elders, they would also lose face. Although the four Palace Masters usually looked as if they did not care much. In fact, all of them hoped that their own disciples would be able to perform well in this competition of the four palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang could achieve such results. At least the strength of their Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had increased by a few points. The next moment, Qin AI's gaze fell on the other disciples in the stone room, and a majestic aura instantly broke out. Regarding Bailey Hongzhuang's results, no one can leak it out. Do you all understand? Bailey Hongzhuang had never shown her strength in cultivation since she entered Tiangang's sect. In the eyes of the other disciples, Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation was a mystery. In that case, why not hide Bailey Hongzhuang's strength first? In this way, she could also become their Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's trump card. Yes, this disciple understands. As Qin AI's voice fell, the disciples nodded one after another. They all understood Qin AI's reason for doing so. Although in each palace hall, the disciples competed fiercely for the quota. However, when the battle of the four palaces truly began, they would belong to the same branch palace. Only when the disciples of the palace hall obtained a good ranking could they get more cultivation resources. Therefore, such a secret would never be leaked out. After receiving the disciples' answer, Qin AI nodded and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, you go back first. When the assessment is completely over and the participants have been decided, I will send someone to inform you. At that time, I will tell the 20 participating disciples about the rules of the competition and what to pay attention to. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang, Qin AI's attitude was much gentler and more cordial. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang understood that the quota for the competition of the four palaces was already in her bag. After walking out of the stone room, Bailey Hongzhuang saw Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu still waiting for her outside the stone room. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang come out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu immediately greeted her. Hongzhuang, how are you? Did you get a spot? Xia Jiqing quickly asked. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded. I've already gotten a spot. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's faces both showed a smile. That's great. I knew that with your strength, you would definitely be able to get a spot. By the way, Hong Zhuang, what happened in the stone room just now? We only heard a series of gasps, as if something terrible had happened. Xia Jiqing's face was full of curiosity. Not only them, but the disciples outside the stone room were also very curious. If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't go in to take a look, many disciples would have already gone in to check it out. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and said, "Actually, nothing much happened. It's just that some of the disciples were of a higher level, so everyone was very surprised. Since Qin AI told everyone not to spread this news, then he must have his reasons. Therefore, Bailey Hongzhuang did not mention it. Then what do we do now? Go back?" Bai Junyu asked. Previously, he and Xia Jiqing had already been tested, but with the strength of the two of them, there was still a certain distance to get a spot. Chapter 22:15. There's nothing else. Let's go back. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips were slightly raised. Her smile was clear and charming. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang listened to Xia Jiqing talk about a lot of things that had happened recently. They often contacted Gong Shaoqing and the others, and now Lu Qinyue often gathered with them. Although Lu Qinyue had not been in the alchemy hall for a long time, with her strength and beauty, she was very popular in the alchemy hall. Similarly, Gong Shaoqing and Lu Qinyue's relationship also had some progress, and there were even disciples who challenged Gong Shaoqing for Lu Qinyue. Bailey Hongzhuang did not know about these things before, but now she found it very interesting. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the house to rest for about 2 hours, a disciple came to find her, saying that the hall master had informed her to go to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall under the guidance of a disciple. This was the first time she came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. This was naturally smaller than the Tiangang Sex Hall, but it was red all over and looked very eye-catching. When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, there were already many disciples gathered in the hall. Among them, Qin AI was sitting on the main seat, looking at the disciples present with a smile. After Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, the eyes of some disciples fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. Suddenly, many disciples frowned. When the other disciples were looking at Bailey Hongzhuang was also looking at the other disciples. With this look, Bailey Hongzhuang found that there were no familiar faces among the 20 disciples. Obviously, these disciples were the old disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and it was extremely difficult for the new disciples to compete with the old disciples for this quota. After all, the old disciples' cultivation time was much longer than the new disciples, and their strength was naturally not comparable to the new disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang also got a quota. She is the only one among the new disciples. Could it be that she got the quota by relying on the young sect master? What's impossible about that? We don't have Bailey Hongzhuang's ability, so we can only rely on ourselves. The competition of the 4 palaces this time concerns the honor of our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, as well as the allocation of cultivation resources for our disciples. If we allow Bailey Hongzhuang to participate, wouldn't that be equivalent to us losing a spot for no reason? In this kind of matter, young sect master and palace master are actually so biased. It's simply too disappointing. A group of old disciples looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a bit of dissatisfaction. They were all disciples who cultivated blindly in order to make themselves strong enough to be outstanding. To them, Bailey Hongzhuang was someone who got in through the back door, so they were unhappy from the bottom of their hearts. As for Bailey Hongzhuang's performance in the alchemist competition, what did that have to do with cultivation? Since her pill refining skills were so good, then she should stay in the cultivation palace and not harm others here. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed the unkind gazes from the surrounding disciples, but she didn't mind it too much. Anyway, tomorrow was the start of the competition of the 4 palaces, and their true abilities would be revealed on the tournament stage. Since everyone is here, then let me introduce the rules of tomorrow's competition. Qin AI's voice slowly rang out. Chapter 22:16. The Battle of the 4 Palaces is divided into the preliminary round and the final round. The preliminary round uses the elimination system. 20 disciples from each side palace will take part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces. A total of 80 disciples will take part. There is no room for redemption in the preliminary round. Once you fail, you will lose the right to continue. In the first preliminary round, 40 out of 80 will remain. In the second preliminary round, 20 out of 40 will remain. In the third preliminary round, 10 out of 20 will remain. After the preliminary round, the remaining 10 disciples will enter the final round. The first round of the final round will be the same as the preliminary round. Out of 10 disciples, only 5 will remain. The last 5 disciples will take turns to fight, and the disciple with the most wins will win the first place. Following Qin AI's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest instantly understood. The rules were simple and easy to understand. They only needed to win 3 rounds in a row to enter the final round. As for the martial arts championship, every sect will have 10 places, and the young sect master will participate as well. Hence, the disciples who have been eliminated in the first round of the final round will participate in the ranking round again to determine the places for the martial arts championship. Basically, as long as you enter the final round, you will more or less win a place for the martial arts championship. Qin AI's face was filled with a faint smile. He knew that the disciples were very concerned about the martial arts championship. If it did not make this clear to everyone, they would be very anxious. Rather than that, he might as well make it clear to them. This way, everyone would be able to pay more attention to every round. Once they lost, they would miss the opportunity to enter the martial arts championship. Sure enough, when everyone heard this, their eyes immediately lit up. They only needed to do their best to win 3 rounds in a row, and they would more or less win a place for the martial arts championship. Qin AI noticed the joy on everyone's faces and began to wake them up. It looks like you only need to win 3 rounds in a row to win a place, but winning every round is not an easy task. The disciples who are taking part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces are the most outstanding disciples from each side palace, and their powers are definitely not weak. Hence, you must not harbor any feelings of love rivals. There was not much difference in the powers of the 4 palaces. Every battle of the 4 palaces was a fierce battle, and the results would not be known until the end. It may seem easy to win 3 rounds in a row, but luck played a role in this as well. If you met a strong opponent as soon as you entered the arena, then you could only say that you were unlucky and were eliminated as soon as you entered the arena. However, other than the trump cards of the various branch palaces, the strength of the majority of the disciples was not too different. Therefore, the element of luck would be slightly better. Disciple will keep that in mind. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others replied with a salute. Bailey Hongzhuang thought to herself. The process of this competition was not complicated, but it was clear that winning each round was not an easy task. She didn't know much about the strength of the Tiangang sect's disciples. Similarly, she didn't know what level she was at. According to the situation of her cultivation with Bewitching during this period of time, presumably her strength should not be too bad in Tiangang sect. These disciples were all older than her and had cultivated for a longer time than her. Moreover, she was not the only one who had obtained first place in the assessment competition. Chapter 22:17. In addition, I have one more thing to remind everyone. When your opponent's strength is not enough to display all your means, you can look at the situation and hide your strength. Once all your cards are exposed in the early stage, it is very likely that you will be targeted. Qin AI had been the palace master of Tiangang sect for so many years, so she was very clear about this situation. Once targeted, it would be even more difficult to win. The disciples nodded and remembered Qin AI's words in their hearts. Because the participants of the competition of the 4 palaces were all very famous disciples of the 4 palaces, this competition of the 4 palaces would go on for several days. Every time the competition of the 4 palaces was held, it was a big event for Tiangang sect. All the disciples would temporarily put aside their cultivation and other matters to watch the competition of the 4 palaces. After all, even if they couldn't participate, watching the battle of the powerful disciples could also make them gain some benefits. Therefore, each disciple would only participate in 1 battle a day. This was also to allow the disciples to recover their fighting strength better, so that they could break out their true strength on the martial arts stage. Speaking of which, only the first day had the most battles. The number of battles would decrease every day, but there would be more and more disciples watching. After Qin AI told everyone the things they needed to pay attention to, everyone left the meeting hall. Tomorrow was the day when the competition of the four palaces would begin. Everyone had to go back and prepare well for tomorrow's battle. The next day, Bailey Hongzhuang got up early. Because today was the 80th elimination round, there would be a total of 40 battles, so the competition of the four palaces would start very early. As for whether these 40 battles would be divided into 1 day or 2 days, this would depend on the situation. As soon as Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the house, she found that there were many disciples outside the house who were setting off for the competition venue. It was the first time that Bailey Hongzhuang had seen such a lively scene. "Hongzhuang, if you are ready, let's go together." Xia Jiqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile. They were not qualified to compete, so today's main purpose was to watch Bailey Hongzhuang compete. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Okay. As a disciple who was going to participate in the competition today, he definitely couldn't be late. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had already set off very early. However, when they arrived at the competition venue, they discovered that there was already a sea of people in the vicinity. As far as the eye could see, there was only a sea of black heads moving about. It was impossible to tell who was who. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at the surrounding area that could hold tens of thousands of spectators, and she understood that this place must have been specially prepared for the battle of the four palaces. In Tiangang sect, perhaps only the competition between the four halls could attract so many people. Not only the disciples, but the palace masters and elders had also arrived early. The four hall masters and the hall master of the alchemy hall had already sat down on the high platform. As they looked at the lively scene, they all smiled. In the middle of the 5 palace masters, there was an empty seat, which was obviously reserved for Bewitching. After Bailey Hongzhuang looked around, she greeted Xia Jiqing and the other two and went to the area where the participating disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were located. Chapter 22:18. After all, if the participating disciples did not stay in one place to wait for the battle, it would not be easy for that person to walk up to the tournament stage from the crowd when the call came. The disciples from the 4 side palaces stood in 4 different areas and were not too far apart. At this moment, they were full of energy and looked around in high spirits. Today was the stage for them to perform. As outstanding cultivators, they were very willing to let everyone know how powerful they were. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, more than half of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples had already arrived. She stopped at the back of the crowd. As soon as she appeared, Bailey Hongzhuang could feel a lot of disdainful gazes falling on her. Yesterday, ever since they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang would be taking part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces, the participating disciples had gone back to ask about the results of the test that Bailey Hongzhuang had entered the apparatus. However, all the disciples who were asked shook their heads as if they could not say anything. Most importantly, the palace lord had instructed them not to say anything. After finding out the answer, the participating disciples understood the answer even more clearly. They did not need to think to know that Bailey Hongzhuang's powers had not reached the standard to take part in the Battle of the 4 Palaces. It was only because of her status as the young sect master that Bailey Hongzhuang had been given a place. In order to cause an even bigger commotion, the palace lord had ordered all the disciples to keep their mouths shut. But so what if they had kept their mouths shut? One would only need to think carefully to know the answer. Hence, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with even more unfriendly gazes. They had relied on their own hard work to get to where they were today. Bailey Hongzhuang had only relied on one layer of relationship to obtain all of this so easily. Some of the disciples could not help but wonder if Bailey Hongzhuang would use this layer of relationship to directly obtain a place in the Battle of the Deer. If that was really the case, it would be too unfair to them. This Bailey Hongzhuang really likes to be in the limelight. Since she's an alchemist, She should just be an alchemist obediently. Why must she come here to join in the fun? I don't believe that young sect master will still give her a place in the battle for the throne if she can't enter the finals. That's right. If that's the case, even the young sect master won't be able to escape the gossip. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with displeasure. The other disciples in the group were all powerful people, and they knew each other well. Only this Bailey Hongzhuang was nothing. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly when she heard the discussion of the disciples. It seemed that everyone had a lot of opinions about her. Master, these fellows' words are too harsh. I'll go scold them. Xiaohei had always been hot-tempered. She could not hold back at all when faced with such a situation. Before Bailey Hongzhuang could stop her, Xiaohei's angry voice rang out. What are you guys talking about? You don't know anything. If you don't have the power, just say it. Why are you still pretending to be all high and mighty? What other abilities do you have apart from belittling others? Xiaohei placed her hands on her hips and stood on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She looked as if she could hold back 10,000 men and compete to see who could scold the other more. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had originally wanted to ridicule Bailey Hongzhuang. No one had expected that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would actually start scolding her. Chapter 22:19. If Bailey Hongzhuang knew what these disciples were thinking, she too would not be able to resist ridiculing them. Yesterday, she was just too lazy to bother about it. Not that she didn't dare to bother about it. To her, the amount of criticism she had suffered along the way was just too much, and she had long stopped caring about what others thought. After all, people live for themselves, and she couldn't be bothered about what others thought. But when Xiaohei said that, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples' gazes all fell onto Bailey Hongzhuang. From their point of view, they didn't think that it was Xiaohei who had scolded them. It must be Bailey Hongzhuang who had instigated her contracted beast to stand out and scold them. This move was truly despicable enough. What we've said is the truth. If you hadn't relied on your relationship with the young sect master, how could you possibly obtain the quota to take part in the competition of the four palaces? Tan Yuehan's face was filled with displeasure and anger. As a lady, she had put in a huge amount of effort to obtain her current position in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, which was filled with talents. Originally, she was the limelight in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. But ever since Bailey Hongzhuang appeared, everyone's attention had shifted onto Bailey Hongzhuang. On one hand, it was because Bailey Hongzhuang could possibly be the future young sect master's wife. On the other hand, it was because of Bailey Hongzhuang's outstanding looks. However, this Bailey Hongzhuang obviously didn't have a body constitution that attracted people's affection. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's background and looks weren't bad, but she was still the target of suspicion in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. However, ever since the alchemist competition had ended, the situation had changed, and many disciples had changed their views towards Bailey Hongzhuang. She was originally feeling displeased, but Bailey Hongzhuang was only an alchemist and didn't have much interaction with her, so she didn't mind. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had now taken part in the competition of the four palaces, so naturally she felt extremely displeased when she saw Bailey Hongzhuang. You idiot! My master got it with his own ability, and I'll say that you got it by relying on some messy connections. Xiaohei was an expert at stirring up trouble. It did not care what other people said. Anyway, it did not know what they were talking about. All it needed to do was to slander them. Everything was that simple. You're talking nonsense. Tan Lihan was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. It was obvious that Xiaohei was furious. You're the one who's talking nonsense. Your whole family is full of nonsense. Xiaohei hopped on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She was best at talking. Even if a few more people were to scold her, she would not be afraid at all. Xiaobai was also good at fighting, but now that it saw that Xiaohei was able to completely stun this guy, there was no need for it to step forward and show off its strength. Bailey Hongzhuang had never been afraid of shedding all pretense of cordiality. Usually, she couldn't be bothered to say it, because she couldn't be bothered. However, when this kind of thing really happened, she didn't care in the slightest. Since so many people in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were not convinced, then she would make them completely convinced. There is only one way to do it. Beat them up. Bailey Hongzhuang, don't go overboard. Tan Lihan stared angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang. Her voice had not been the loudest, but she never thought that after Xiao He had spoken, she would be the only one to speak. Chapter 22:20. The Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples were all looking at the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang with great interest. Previously, when everyone was verbally attacking Bailey Hongzhuang, they naturally didn't mind joining in. However, since Bailey Hongzhuang had started to retaliate, no matter what, they still had to take into account the young sect master's identity. Even if they felt disdain towards Bailey Hongzhuang for breaking the rules to obtain such a quota, but the young sect master's identity was there. If they were to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang now, wouldn't that mean that they were dissatisfied with the young sect master and palace master Qin's decision? The bird that sticks out gets shot, so they would never do something that was disadvantageous to themselves. However, for a hothead like Tan Lihan to be willing to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were happy to see that. Seeing that Tan Lihan had taken the initiative to provoke her, Bailey Hongzhuang lightly turned around and her cold and distant gaze sized up Tan Lihan for a moment. Her red lips parted slightly and her voice was cold. Tan Lihan, from the beginning to the end, it was you who was attacking me and I didn't say a single word. Now you're asking me not to go overboard? Bailey Hongzhuang's expression became increasingly cold and her eyes were as cold as ice. I think you're the one who shouldn't go overboard. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Tan Lihan's expression froze. From the looks of it, the matter indeed seemed to be as such. That's not right. Tan Lihan wasn't intimidated by Bailey Hongzhuang's words as she continued. Doesn't your contracted beast's words represent your own words? That's what you think, not what I said. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was indifferent and her state was elegant. She didn't seem to care about Tan Lihan's words at all. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's indifferent look, Tan Lihan felt even more displeased. It was obvious that Bailey Hongzhuang was the one who had no ability. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang was standing at the top to criticize her. This was too funny. Bailey Hongzhuang, I didn't expect you to be so good at quibbling. This must be how you got your ability to get in through the back door, right? You obviously don't have the strength, yet you still took up a spot. You are really shameless. Tan Lihan originally had some scruples about Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, but now that she was angry, she couldn't care less. As soon as these words came out, the disciples present all looked at each other in dismay. It seemed that the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang was about to escalate. No matter how calm Bailey Hongzhuang was, in the face of Tan Lihan's accusation, she would definitely lose face. Just when everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to go crazy, Bailey Hongzhuang sneered and her lips curled into a mocking smile. Even if I got in through the back door, what has that got to do with you? If you have the ability, you can get in through the back door. If you don't have the ability, then shut your mouth. Besides, against a pig-like opponent like you, Bailey Hongzhuang disdained to get in through the back door. After Bailey Hongzhuang's words came out, she couldn't even be bothered to look at Tan Lihan. That look was filled with disdain towards Tan Lihan, and even looking at her was a waste of time. Tan Lihan was stunned. The disciples present were all stunned. Was Bailey Hongzhuang admitting that she had gotten in through the back door? But just as Bailey Hongzhuang had said, towards Bailey Hongzhuang being able to get in through the back door, most of the disciples were envious and jealous. Who asked them to not be able to do it? Chapter 22:21. Through the back door? She really did not have that ability. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent. Bailey Hongzhuang was only a new disciple, and a new disciple who had spent all her energy on refining pills. Now, she had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent. Tan Lihan only felt a surge of anger in her chest, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Based on her, Tan Lihan's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, who would dare to say that she was a pig-like opponent? Just as Tan Lihan was about to rebut Bailey Hongzhuang, a low and cold voice rang out. Tan Lihan, since you're already well aware of it, why continue to fuss over it? Hearing this voice, Tan Lihan was slightly taken aback. She immediately looked towards the man who had spoken, and her face instantly turned red as she nodded. Bailey Hongzhuang also looked towards the man who had spoken. The man was handsome, and his posture was steady and cold. His coldness was different from Gong Shaoqing's indifference. His coldness was more like a form of contempt. He despised everyone around him, so he was very cold, because these people were unable to receive any of his attention. Shun Xiuhan, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 disciple, was a cultivation maniac. Usually, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples rarely saw Shun Xiuhan. Even if it was the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's internal competitions, Shun Xiuhan would not even bother to participate. However, even though Shun Xiuhan rarely appeared, his position as #1 was still extremely stable. He had a very high reputation in the hearts of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples. The existence of the most powerful cultivator had always attracted attention. Shun Xiuhan glanced coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang. It was just a glance, but Bailey Hongzhuang could clearly see that it was full of disdain. It was as if Bailey Hongzhuang, a person who had walked through the back door without any real talent, was beneath his notice. Compared to Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang felt that Shun Xiuhan's disdain was even more unpleasant. Who did this guy think he was? How dare he look at her with such a gaze? Fuck, this guy really knows how to act cool. When Xiaohei saw Shun Xiuhan, she couldn't help but curse. It wasn't that she had never seen a pretentious person, but she had never seen such a pretentious person. Even young masters like Di Beichun, Wen Ziren, and even Mo Yunjua wouldn't dare to look at Master with such a gaze. Who the hell did this guy think he was? As the #1 expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he doesn't show off, how can he show off how extraordinary he is? However, I'm curious if he can still maintain his arrogance and disdain when he's beaten to the ground. Xiaobai sneered. Acting tough will get you struck by lightning. Xiaohei, Xiaobai, and Little White Lion were beasts who loved to show off. Now that there was someone who could show off better than them, they were very displeased. They should be the ones in charge of being in the limelight and having their own halo. The voices of the three beasts were not soft, and in an instant, all the participating disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall heard them clearly. Instantly, everyone's expressions became interesting. Shun Xiuhan's expression stiffened, and his expert demeanor was almost broken. Where had Bailey Hongzhuang found such a top-grade, contracted beast? He, Shun Xiuhan, had always shown such an attitude after coming to Tiangang's sect. Who dared to criticize him? Chapter 22-22. Even though his anger had reached its peak, Shun Xiuhan still managed to hold back his anger. As the #1 disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he were to argue with Bailey Hongzhuang like this, it would be a loss of grace. If word got out, it would be extremely disadvantageous to him. After all, he rarely argued with others on a daily basis. There was only one way for him to argue, and that was to teach the other party a lesson. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had not said anything. The ones who had spoken were Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beasts. If word of this got out, he would undoubtedly lose all face. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang could say that this matter had nothing to do with him. However, if he were to argue in secret, he would be too petty. Furthermore, teaching Bailey Hongzhuang a lesson was not urgent. After the Battle of the Four Palaces had begun, he would use his own power to make Bailey Hongzhuang understand that he was not acting pretentious. When the cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Shun Xiuhan had maintained his silence, their expressions became a little more interesting. It must be said that Shun Xiuhan's usual arrogant and cold style was not the least bit approachable. Many of the disciples were unhappy, but because of Shun Xiuhan's power, they could only swallow their anger. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang's 3 contracted beasts had directly exposed Shun Xiuhan's pretense, they felt extremely delighted. It must be said that they enjoyed a clash between cultivators of such status very much. Tan Lihan glared angrily at Bailey Hongwang, her bright eyes filled with anger and hatred. She had always admired Shen Xiuhan. From her point of view, Shen Xiuhan was her future man. Usually, she worshipped Shen Xiuhan the most. Shen Xiuhan was her sky. As a female disciple, Shen Xiuhan was the main reason why she had been able to cultivate to her current level of power. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's mockery of her, she was even more dissatisfied with Bailey Hongzhuang's insults towards Shen Xiuhan. No one had ever dared to say such things about Shen Xiuhan. The male god in her heart would not allow anyone to slander him. Tan Lihan had already remembered this grudge in her heart. The battle between the four palaces was about to begin. No matter how arrogant Bailey Hongzhuang was, she would not be able to stay arrogant for long. On the contrary, Shen Xiuhan was the main character of this battle. What she hoped for the most now was to be able to meet Bailey Hongzhuang on the tournament stage. However, in the competition between the four palaces, disciples from different palaces would face off against disciples from different palaces. She was afraid that she would not have much of a chance. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, it was impossible for her to enter the finals. For Bailey Hongzhuang, this incident was just an interlude. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang turned her attention to the stage. Under everyone's amazed and admiring gazes, a faint golden figure slowly appeared in everyone's line of sight. The five palace masters hurriedly stood up and bowed deeply to the handsome man who was slowly walking over. The man looked as if he had walked over under the sun, like the stars surrounding the moon, noble and elegant, unparalleled. In a split second, all the brilliance seemed to be enveloped by Bewitching. Everyone's eyes were fixed on this figure. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curled into a smile. Bewitching was such a breathtaking existence. No matter where he was, he would always be the focus of attention. Chapter 22-23. Just one smile, that moment of youth. Even in such a crowd, they could still see each other at a glance. Bewitching slowly sat down and waved his hand slightly. The crowd of disciples then stood up straight, full of vigor and anticipation. Quite a number of disciples had noticed Bewitching's smile towards Bailey Hongzhuang, and they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. The young sect master's feelings towards Bailey Hongzhuang were indeed not ordinary. Tan Lihan glared hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang, her heart feeling extremely indignant. She just couldn't stand looking at Bailey Hongzhuang. Apart from her outstanding looks and bewitching looks, everything else about this woman was just average. However, the young sect master's honorable presence was actually so affectionate towards Bailey Hongzhuang. It was really hard to imagine. In terms of looks, she felt that her looks weren't too bad either. In comparison, she had liked Shen Xiuhan for a very long time, but he had never expressed his feelings towards her. Although her power couldn't be compared to Shen Xiuhan's, it wasn't too bad. The gap between the two of them wasn't that huge, but she could always feel that Shen Xiuhan cared about her. However, the gap between Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master was simply a chasm that was difficult to cross. Even so, the young sect master had still acknowledged Bailey Hongzhuang's existence in front of everyone. The gap between the two of them was just too big. While Tan Lihan was glaring hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay any attention to Tan Lihan. However, she could still feel her gaze. It looked like Tan Lihan really hated her this time. But even so what? Since the young sect master is here, let's begin the competition between the four palaces, shall we? Qin Ai's face was filled with a warm and benevolent smile as he asked Bewitching respectfully. Bewitching nodded slightly and said, "Since everyone is here, let's begin." After receiving Bewitching's approval, the palace masters and elders were all smiles. Bewitching immediately stood up and looked at the dense crowd of disciples below the high platform. His voice was magnetic and loud. The Battle of the Four Halls has always been a tradition of the Tiangang sect. The ranking of the Battle of the Four Halls is also related to the distribution of resources in the following period of time. Presumably, everyone was paying close attention to this competition between the four palaces and had been looking forward to it for a long time. At the same time, everyone should know that this Battle of the Four Palaces will affect the Battle of Zhuolu in 3 months' time. Once one participates in the Battle of Zhuolu, as long as one performs well in the Battle of Zhuolu, one's name will truly spread throughout the world. Therefore, in this competition between the four palaces, I hope that everyone will be able to bring out their true strength. As Bewitching's voice fell, the eyes of all the disciples present lit up, especially those participating in the competition. This was a crucial moment for their future. Speaking of which, the disciples who were participating in the Battle of the Four Palaces felt that they were exceptionally lucky. Coincidentally, the Battle of the Four Palaces was related to the quota for the Battle of Zhuolu. If it had been any other time, they wouldn't have had such an opportunity. I believe that everyone is ready. Then, I hereby announce that the Battle of the Four Palaces has officially begun. In a split second, the atmosphere in the entire battle arena changed. All the disciples looked at the stage with great anticipation. The exciting competition would begin here. Chapter 22-24. Under everyone's gaze, Xiao Yingzi slowly stood up. The Great Elder had completely disappeared from Tiangang's sect. Therefore, Xiao Yingzi, who was originally the second elder, was now the Great Elder of Tiangang's sect. The preliminary round uses the method of drawing lots. Disciples who draw the same number will compete with each other. The order of the competition will be determined according to this number. Number 1 is the disciple in the first round of the competition. Number 40 is the disciple in the last round of the competition. Does everyone understand? In the process of this competition, only drawing lots was the fairest method. Disciples understand. The participating disciples of the 4 major branch halls responded one after another. Now, the participating disciples can come up to the stage to draw lots. Listening to Xiao Yingzi's words, the disciples of the 4 major branch halls walked up to the high platform one after another. This drawing lots was also an opportunity for them to show their abilities. When every disciple walked up to the high platform, there would be a burst of discussion below the high platform. As the existence of the top 20 of each branch hall of Tiangang's sect, they had always been known by everyone. The participating disciples were even more arrogant. There were already the existence of powerhouses to be able to obtain a place in this competition. Bailey Hongzhuang also walked up to the high platform. After drawing her lot, she walked back to her original position. When Bailey Hongzhuang walked back to the preparation position of the participating disciples, she found that everyone's position was according to the order of the competition. In this way, they could also see who their next opponent was. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. Everything was really simple and clear. Bailey Hongzhuang was number 27. Her appearance was a little late, so her position was also a little further back. Her opponent was a male disciple of the Azure Dragon Hall. However, she didn't know much about the Azure Dragon Hall and didn't know how strong her opponent was. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the male disciple's gaze also fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. The moment he saw Bailey Hongzhuang, the male disciple was obviously stunned for a moment. After he reacted, he revealed a smile. Bailey Hongzhuang also responded with a smile. Tan Lihan and Shun Xiuhan's rankings were relatively high. Tan Lihan was in the 7th round, while Shun Xiuhan was in the 15th round. Coincidentally, she could also understand their strength through their competition. After drawing lots, the first round of the competition began. There was only one huge battling platform in this huge martial arts arena. The scale was extremely vast. After the referee elder introduced the names of the 2 disciples and the sub-palaces they came from, the competition officially began. This battle was just as Bailey Hongzhuang had expected. The strength of each disciple selected from the sub-palace was not weak. On this martial arts stage, they even used all their skills. Their combat strength was very astonishing. Therefore, they were in a stalemate when they exchanged blows. Both sides were in a deadlock, and no one could do anything to the other for a while. However, one couldn't help but admit that the strength of these disciples was really outstanding. The collision of their martial skills and battle experience would often cause the disciples and the spectators stand to cry out in surprise. Through watching this competition, they understood the difference in strength between themselves and the disciples on the ranking board. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was watching the competition, a voice rang out beside Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 22-25. Hearing this unfamiliar voice, Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. She had never met this Yi Chenyu before. However, since the other party took the initiative to express goodwill, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't mind making another friend. Of course, the premise was that the other party didn't have any other thoughts. So, it's senior brother Yi. Sorry for the disrespect. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled lightly. Junior sister Bailey doesn't spend much time in the palace. I presume you don't know much about your opponents. I've always liked to collect information, especially about the participating disciples. I have some understanding of their strength. Why don't I introduce them to junior sister Bailey? Yi Chenyu was obviously a friendly person. After seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang didn't reject him, he immediately began to introduce. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She indeed didn't know anything about the participating disciples. This was a bit disadvantageous. If someone could introduce her, she would naturally be very happy. Then I'll have to trouble senior brother Yi. Your opponent is Lu Zhengyang of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. I can say that junior sister Bailey's luck is very good. Yi Chenyu smiled lightly. He believed that there were many people who were envious of Bailey Hongzhuang's good luck. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. She had more or less understood Yi Chenyu's meaning. This Lu Zhengyang is at the bottom of the participating disciples of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. If there are no accidents, he will definitely be eliminated in the first round. He is 21 this year and has been in the Tiangang sect for 2 years. His current cultivation is between Green Realm Level 9 and Green Realm Level 1. As far as I know, he was still Green Realm Level 9 before. However, I feel that in order to have a good performance in the competition between the 4 palaces, he must have tried his best to break through to Green Realm Level 1. The last 40 disciples participating in the competition between the 4 palaces have about the same cultivation. However, everyone's fighting strength is different. However, the first place of the 4 palaces is much stronger. Yi Chenyu earnestly explained the situation to Bailey Hongzhuang. The participating disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall didn't know of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, but he did. This was because when Bailey Hongzhuang was taking the test yesterday, he was also in the stone room and personally saw Bailey Hongzhuang's heaven stage. Even in the entire Tiangang sect, how many disciples of this level could appear? Therefore, he knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was not weak. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang stood on the martial arts stage and began to compete, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples would probably be stunned. He had already admired Bailey Hongzhuang very much during the alchemist competition. In addition, Bailey Hongzhuang was a cultivator who had been evaluated as a heaven stage cultivator, which made him admire her even more. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang was very amiable and approachable. He was very happy to have the opportunity to be friends with Bailey Hongzhuang. After Bailey Hongzhuang understood LV Xingyang's strength, she understood in her heart. She didn't expect that her luck in randomly drawing lots would be so good. This way, she could still hide a certain amount of her strength in the first round of the preliminary competition. I didn't expect senior brother Yi to understand the situation of these disciples so well. I really admire you. Originally, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay much attention to Yi Chenyu's words. After all, as long as one stayed in Tiangang sect long enough, it was normal to have some understanding of some disciples. Chapter 22-26. Junior Sister Bailey is too polite. With Junior Sister's ability, it's easy for you to obtain this information. It's just that Junior Sister is busy and doesn't know much about it. In fact, most of the disciples participating today have some understanding of their opponents. In this way, we can reduce the possibility of being at a disadvantage when we fight. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. She knew that Yi Chenyu was telling the truth. The battle of the 4 palaces this time was related to many things. Every disciple was thinking of ways to make full preparations. It wasn't difficult to obtain information. As long as they walked around a few palaces and spent some resources to inquire, they would definitely be able to obtain the information they wanted. However, none of the disciples were fools. Thus, they would hide some of their strength. However, the gap wouldn't be too big. Bailey Hongzhuang had previously spent all her time on raising her cultivation and didn't have the time to pay attention to these things. She never thought that Yi Chenyu would tell her about these things. Senior brother Ye's information is very helpful to me. However, I still want to know some information from senior brother. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said. Yi Chenyu smiled. Junior sister Bailey, if you have any questions, just tell me. I will tell you everything I know. To him, most of this information was known to everyone. If he could make Bailey Hongzhuang think highly of him, he would be extremely happy. Of course, the information he gathered was more specific than what the ordinary disciples gathered. I wonder if senior brother Yi can introduce me to the strongest of the 4 palaces? Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Yi Chenyu. She didn't pay much attention to the strength of the ordinary disciples. However, the strongest of the 4 palaces were definitely extremely powerful. Once they entered the finals, they would definitely encounter each other. She had to understand more. Originally, she planned to wait until the end of today's competition to find out more. However, since there was Yi Chenyu, who was extremely knowledgeable, she naturally wouldn't go too far. This is naturally not a problem. Yi Chenyu smiled. The strongest of the Azure Dragon Hall is called Xiao Feilin. He's 23 years old and has been famous in the Azure Dragon Hall for a long time. When he first entered the Tiangang sect, he was already very powerful and deeply praised by the Azure Dragon Hall Master. Under the nurturing of the Tiangang sect's resources, his potential completely exploded, and the speed at which his strength increased was extremely shocking. For the past year, he had been in seclusion and could be called a cultivation maniac. He had never fought with anyone, so it was difficult to judge his strength. However, it is said that before he went into seclusion, his cultivation had already reached Green Realm Level 9. At the mention of Xiao Feilin, Yi Chenyu couldn't help but sigh. The strength of such an expert was simply too shocking. Even if the cultivators behind him tried their best to catch up, they were still too far away. Bailey Hongzhuang secretly exclaimed in her heart. Sure enough, the first rankers of this branch hall were all extremely terrifying existences. Their talent and strength were both astonishing. The strongest person in the White Tiger Hall is called Xiao Feiyu. She and the Azure Dragon Hall's Xiao Feilin are blood siblings. Both of their talents are extremely shocking. However, these two people had always regarded each other as opponents and wanted to defeat each other. Therefore, when they first entered Tiangang's sect, they chose different branches. Chapter 22-27. After learning that Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were actually a pair of siblings, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. The genes of this pair of siblings were truly amazing. Our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 expert is Shun Xiuhan. He's 24 years old, and very few people are able to communicate with him. Shun Xiuhan can be said to be the most difficult person to approach among the experts of the 4 palaces, but his strength is also admirable. In this year, Shun Xiuhan is the same as Xiao Feilin, always in a state of seclusion and rarely appears in front of everyone. It could be assumed that the experts of the 4 palaces had already known about the Battle of Zhuolu. Therefore, they had put all their efforts into improving their cultivation in order to perform well in the Battle of the 4 palaces. The strength of the experts of the 4 palaces is not too different, so the ranking has always been controversial and has never been confirmed. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Shun Xiuhan indifferently. Although Shun Xiuhan was arrogant and disdainful, she had to admit that he did have his own abilities. The #1 expert of the Black Martial Hall is Yin Bin. Like his name, he is straightforward and can be said to have a violent temper. Moreover, Yin Bin is famous for being a battle maniac. As long as there is a disagreement, he will start a fight. Thinking back, the Black Martial Hall Master also felt very helpless towards Yin Bin, but because Yinbin is indeed a cultivation genius and has now become the #1 expert of the Black Martial Hall, the previous problems naturally disappeared. Under Yi Qinyu's reminder, Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the appearances of the 4 great experts. Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were indeed brother and sister. Their appearances were very similar, but after looking at them for a while, she felt that Xiao Feilin was more feminine and Xiao Feiyu was more masculine. As expected, the extremely similar faces were of completely different genders. After looking at them for a long time, it was quite magical. Needless to say, Shan Xiuhan was cold and arrogant, looking down from above, with a bit of the demeanor of an expert. Yinbin was like his name. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not someone to be trifled with. However, his appearance was very outstanding, just like a sunny and handsome man. However, any disciple who had some understanding of Yinbin knew that all this was just on the surface. If anyone provoked him, it would be really troublesome. Even Shin Xiuhan and the others were not willing to have any conflicts with Yinbin. When the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Yi Qinyu had taken the initiative to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were somewhat astonished. Yi Qinyu's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was also not bad. His strength was also very high. Furthermore, Yi Qinyu had another ability, which was that he was extremely good at gathering information. In fact, although everyone was very unhappy that Bailey Hongzhuang had obtained this quota through the back door, there were still many disciples who wanted to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang because of her identity. Therefore, when Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang clashed, no one helped Tan Lihan. However, no one expected that Yi Qinyu would take the initiative to befriend Bailey Hongzhuang. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang also recognized Yi Qinyu as a friend. Yi Qinyu's actions were really fast. When Shin Xiuhan saw that Yi Qinyu and Bailey Hongzhuang were chatting happily, he could not help but furrow his brows. However, he quickly returned to his usual appearance. In the process of this conversation, the competition continued. Chapter 22-28. As long as the disciples ranked in the bottom 40 became their opponents, the competition would take a little more time. However, the higher the ranking of the disciples, the less time they spent in the battle. It was almost as if the battle ended in a single exchange. Just from this point, it could be seen how big the difference in strength between the first and the 20th disciple was. Bailey Hongzhuang faintly sighed. The huge Tiangang sect was really full of talents. Wanting to enter the finals was not an easy task. As for ranking in the front, that was even more difficult. If she had not been in closed-door cultivation for the past 3 months, it would have been impossible for her to obtain a place in the Battle of Zhuolu. Very quickly, the first disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall went up. Bailey Hongzhuang saw that this figure was very familiar because this person was the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jianyuan. Thinking back to the first time she went to the arena, Gue Jianyuan told Bailey Hongzhuang a lot of information about the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's cultivation. However, she rarely appeared after that and naturally did not have the chance to see Gue Jianyuan again. Bailey Hongzhuang had a very good impression of the approachable Gue Jianyuan. Previously, Gue Jianyuan had been standing very close to the front, so Bailey Hongzhuang did not notice him. Now that she saw Gue Jianyuan go up the stage, she finally noticed. As expected, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jianyuan's strength was extremely powerful. Although he was not the #1 expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, his ranking would definitely not be bad. After Yi Qinyu saw that Bailey Hongzhuang seemed to be very interested in Gue Jianyuan, he could not help but say, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jianyuan's strength is ranked second in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, second only to Shin Xiuhan. This competition will not put any pressure on Gue Jianyuan. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Her thoughts are the same as Yi Qinyu's. The moment Gue Jianyuan and his opponent exchanged blows, the gap between the two could already be seen. Winning was only a matter of time. In the following period of time, the disciples went up one by one. Time quietly passed in this process. However, the enthusiasm of the disciples around the martial arts stage did not decrease in the slightest. Especially when they saw the disciple they admired going up the martial arts stage, it was as if they had been injected with chicken blood, and they cheered endlessly. Of course, there were also many disciples who were ridiculed and belittled. Tan Lihan's strength was not bad either. She was at Green Realm level 2. No wonder she was so arrogant before. In the first preliminary round, Tan Lihan won. After the victory, Tan Lihan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang provocatively, as if to say, "Look, I'm the real deal." Faced with Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang generously gave her a thumbs up. However, this thumbs up was directed downwards. Tan Lihan was so angry that she wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, on the other hand, was grinning from ear to ear. Taunting the opponent was good for venting one's emotions, and it was also good for one's cultivation. In the afternoon, after such a wait, it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to go up the stage. Round 27, Azure Dragon Palace Hall's Lu Zhenyang versus Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. When the referee elder's voice rang out, the disciples present were all shocked. Compared to the top experts' battles, this battle was also highly anticipated. Chapter 22-29. LV Zhengyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, and everyone knew that he was just a cannon fodder. Of course, being able to become cannon fodder in the competition of the four palaces was something that many people could not hope to achieve. However, they did not expect that LV Zhengyang's opponent would be Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang was a genius. This was a fact that none of the Tiangang sect's disciples could deny. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was not a genius cultivator, but a genius alchemist. In the alchemist competition, no one was Bailey Hongzhuang's match. However, in the competition of the four palaces, Bailey Hongzhuang was at a disadvantage. Hence, even though LV Zhengyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, everyone still thought that LV Zhengyang would win. When the Azure Dragon Palace Lord, Yin Kaicheng, saw that LV Zhengyang's opponent was actually Bailey Hongzhuang, his expression became a little more interesting. Although LV Zhengyang had defeated Bailey Hongzhuang, the competition of the four palaces was just like that. Even though it was only the first round of the preliminary round, whichever palace had the most disciples left would be a kind of glory. Qin AI saw through Yin Kaicheng's thoughts at one glance and could not help but laugh secretly. Bailey Hongzhuang's power was not as simple as everyone thought. He also wanted to know what Yin Kaicheng's expression would be when Bailey Hongzhuang defeated LV Zhengyang later on. Thinking of this, Qin AI felt very happy. Haha! When Yin Kaicheng saw that Qin AI was not the least bit helpless and instead looked very happy, his thoughts changed a little. Could it be that there was a trap in this matter? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Yin Kaicheng felt that it was impossible. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang was a new disciple of the Tiangang sect. Participating in the competition of the four palaces was originally a very disadvantageous matter. Among the disciples participating in the competition of the four palaces, other than Bailey Hongzhuang, no one else was a new disciple. Basically, in every battle of the four palaces, the new disciples did not have a chance. But Bailey Hongzhuang was an exception. The other disciples are disciples who have cultivated in Tiangang sect for more than 2 years. Their age and strength are stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, even if Bailey Hongzhuang had failed in the battle of the four palaces, it would be a very normal thing. Lu Zhenyang, your luck is not bad today. You actually drew junior sister Bailey. You will definitely advance to the second round of the preliminaries. The disciples of the Azure Dragon Hall looked at LV Zhengyang with envy. This kind of luck was really enviable. That may not be the case. Junior sister Bailey was able to participate in the competition of the four palaces, which proves that she is very strong. Chapter 22-30. Under the high platform, Xia Jiqing and the others saw that it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to fight, and they couldn't help but be excited. After waiting for so long, Hong Zhuang is finally going to fight, haha. We haven't seen Hong Zhuang fight for a long time. I don't know what realm Hong Zhuang's strength has reached now. Xia Jiqing's face was full of curiosity. In the past, when she cultivated with Hong Zhuang every day, watching Hong Zhuang's strength increase speed, she only felt that she couldn't catch up. Since entering Tiangang's sect, they hadn't seen Bailey Hong Zhuang fight again, so they didn't know what realm Bailey Hong Zhuang had reached now. Hong Zhuang's cultivation talent is very amazing, but the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples have a much longer cultivation time than Hong Zhuang. Overall, Hong Zhuang is still at a disadvantage. Gong Xiaoqing calmly analyzed the situation in front of him. From the previous battle, it could be seen how strong the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples were. No wonder the new disciples were directly sentenced to death. In the face of such strength, they simply had no chance of winning. Indeed, the disciples of Tiangang's sect have no bad talent, so the longer the cultivation time, the more advantage the disciples have. Therefore, among the disciples, only Hong Zhuang is the youngest. Dongfang Yu was also somewhat helpless. This was completely an unfair battle for the new disciples. However, Bailey Hong Zhuang was able to get the opportunity to participate, which was already very good. Lu Qinyue stared at Bailey Hong Zhuang on the high platform. She had a faint feeling that the current Bailey Hong Zhuang had completely left them behind. On the martial arts stage, Bailey Hong Zhuang and LV Xingyang stood opposite each other, both of their faces showing a polite smile. The competition begins. After the referee elder saw that both of them were ready, he immediately began the competition. Junior sister Bailey, sorry for the offense. LV Xingyang first bowed to Bailey Hong Zhuang. No matter what the final result of this competition was, he hoped that it would not cause a rift between them. When Bailey Hong Zhuang saw that LV Xingyang's attitude was extremely calm, she also bowed and said, "Senior brother, do your best." In the next moment, Lu Xingyang's green realm level 1 aura gushed out of his body like a bolt of lightning. After sensing LV Xingyang's aura, Bailey Hong Zhuang couldn't help but sigh. Yi Qinyu's judgment was really accurate. Judging from LV Xingyang's aura, he had just broken through to Green Realm Rank 1. "Master, leave this competition to me," Baisher said excitedly. His gaze was completely locked onto Lu Xingyang. This was only the first round of the preliminaries. There was no need for its master to make a move. It would be able to deal with it on its own. As their master's contracted beasts, they were a part of their master's strength. Even on this stage, contracted beasts were allowed to fight. Before this, there were many battles where contracted beasts fought. Contracted beasts could increase a cultivator's strength. Moreover, they were completely trustworthy. Therefore, as long as a cultivator had the conditions to have a contracted beast, they would not be stingy with their wealth to exchange for a suitable contracted beast. In this competition between the four palaces, many disciples had their own contracted beasts. Moreover, they were very powerful. Chapter 22:31. Bailey Hong Zhuang was not in a hurry to let Baisher fight. However, after seeing how confident and eager Baisher was, she felt that it was a good choice to let Baisher fight. Baisher's current strength was no longer the same as before. Ever since it consumed a large number of blood-colored demon crystals in the desert world, its improvement could be said to be very shocking. Xiaohe and Xiao Bai were envious after seeing Baisher's improvement speed. However, they could not increase their strength by consuming demon crystals and could only stare in envy. As the only beast king in the world, Baisher was born with talents and abilities that many other demonic beasts did not have. "All right, then you will fight in this match." Bailey Hong Zhuang smiled faintly. Usually, everyone didn't pay much attention to her 3 contracted beasts, but today, in front of everyone's eyes, she wanted to let these disciples know that her 3 contracted beasts weren't incompetent. In the next moment, Bailey Hong Zhuang slowly took a few steps back under everyone's astonished gaze. Then, Baisher directly stood in front of Bailey Hong Zhuang and confronted LV Xingyang. Seeing Baisher's actions, LV Xingyang could not help but be stunned for a moment. He thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would very likely let her contracted beasts fight together. However, even if other disciples fought together with their contracted beasts, it would be a cultivator and a contracted beast working together. However, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's situation, it seemed that she intended to let this contracted beast fight with him and did not intend to participate. Bai Shi's figure had grown a lot. Compared to when it first came to Tiangang's sect with Bailey Hongzhuang, it was now majestic. In fact, when Bailey Hongzhuang appeared with Bai Shi today, many people had already begun to pay attention to Bai Shi. A contracted beast ability could be roughly judged from its size and strength. Some of the disciples present who knew about contracted beasts began to size up Bai Shi. They had to admit that Bai Shi gave off a mighty feeling at a glance, and was definitely not just for show. Bai Shi did not hesitate to attack LV Xingyang as soon as it appeared. It wanted to finish this battle cleanly. Bang! White Lion pounced forward at lightning speed. White Lion was even taller than a cultivator and had an astonishing aura. LV Xingyang did not dare to underestimate White Lion at all. This contract beast level was not low at all. Its strength was probably not inferior to his. Limitless Soft Palm. Essence energy surged out of LV Xingyang's palm, attacking the White Lion with a thunderous momentum. White Lion's reaction speed was extremely fast. He flipped in midair and dodged Lu Xingyang's attack. At the same time, he attacked from another angle. The White Lion's speed was extremely shocking. LV Xingyang did not dare to be negligent as he quickly dodged. The moment the White Lion approached, LV Xingyang felt a huge force attacking him. If he was knocked down by the White Lion, his body would definitely be injured. Bang, bang, bang. LV Xingyang constantly attacked White Lion while White Lion dodged and attacked. Ever since he had trained in the desert world for so long, White Lion, who was already good at speed, was now even faster. His dodging ability was also top-notch. In terms of combat experience, he definitely did not lose to any cultivator. In an instant, LV Xingyang and White Lion rapidly moved around the stage. The scope of the battle shocked everyone. Bang! Chapter 2232. LV Xingyang's body fell heavily to the ground. White Lion pounced on LV Xingyang's body. Its huge mouth and sharp teeth were clearly visible. LV Xingyang felt cold sweat on his forehead. However, in the next second, White Lion had already retreated a few steps. It clearly had no intention of hurting LV Xingyang. LV Xingyang hurriedly stood up and looked at White Lion with lingering fear. White Lion's combat power was truly terrifying. If he had not judged wrongly, White Lion's cultivation level was above his. His contracted beast cultivation level was above his. Even among the contracted beasts in the entire Tiangang sect, there were not many who could compare to White Lion. Junior Sister Bailey, I've lost. LV Xingyang's attitude was calm as he bowed. From the moment he understood White Lion's abilities, he knew that he would lose this match without a doubt. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang had yet to make a move. Once Bailey Hongzhuang made a move, the result would be obvious. You let me win. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Bailey Hongzhuang wins. The referee elder immediately announced the result. The onlookers were all dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Bailey Hongzhuang's victory was just too easy. From the beginning to the end, Bailey Hongzhuang had not made a move at all. She had relied on her contracted beast to crush LV Xingyang. I was wondering why Bailey Hongzhuang was able to participate in this battle of the four palaces. So she relied on her contracted beast. This contracted beast abilities are truly domineering. LV Xingyang's cultivation level has already reached Green Realm first level. Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast is even more powerful. If I had such a contracted beast, how domineering would that be? Everyone's envious eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Such a result was really unexpected. Brother Gong, is Hongzhuang's contracted beast the one I saw in the academy? Lu Qinyue's face was filled with astonishment. This gap was a bit too big. Gong Shaoqing nodded. It's the same one from back then. However, During this period of time, White Lion transformation has become even more shocking. Even one of Boss contracted beasts is so powerful. It's practically a one-sided beating. Yuan Jixing couldn't help but sigh. When the Azure Dragon Hall Master, Yin Kaiqing, saw this result, his face instantly stiffened. He had never expected that Bailey Hongzhuang would have such a trump card. He had never discovered it before. Hall Master Qin, you must have known this long ago, which is why you've always been so confident, right? Yin Kaiqing probed. Qin AI smiled faintly, revealing an unfathomable expression. Then he fell silent. However, Qin AI's heart was filled with astonishment. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would be so powerful. This was a huge surprise for him. Moreover, in this way, everyone would think that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't strong and relied on her contracted beasts. It was a good way to hide Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to enter the finals? Thinking of this possibility, Qin AI couldn't help but feel excited. If a new disciple entered the finals of the Battle of the Four Palaces, it would be the first in Tiangang Sect's history. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked back to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Everyone's gaze was focused on White Lion, wanting to know what kind of beast it was. Chapter 2233. Even though everyone was extremely curious about White Lion's breed, no one was able to determine what kind of breed White Lion was. Most of the breeds of contract beasts were known to everyone, but it was their first time seeing White Lion's breed. The reason why no one was able to determine White Lion's breed was because Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead. Otherwise, they would definitely be able to determine the Beast King's identity. Back then, Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead when she had just found out about its identity. Now, she was even more used to it. Otherwise, once everyone knew that White Lion was a Beast King, it would definitely cause an even bigger commotion. Junior Sister Bailey, congratulations. I didn't expect your contract beast to be so powerful. Yiqing looked at White Lion in amazement. Before this, no one had expected White Lion to be so powerful. In this way, Bailey Hongzhuang's trump card was very shocking. Once Bailey Hongzhuang and White Lion's strength were combined, many disciples would not be a match for Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "Senior brother Yi, you flatter me." Throughout the entire day, the competition continued without stopping. Every disciple who won had a face full of joy, while the disciples who lost were extremely sad. Once they lost, they would not have any more chances. In this process, the 40 rounds of competition finally ended before the sky turned dark. Xiao Ingze announced the names of the disciples who had advanced to the second round of preliminaries. Tomorrow would be the stage for these 40 disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang could be said to be a spectator for the entire day. She only left with everyone after the competition ended. Bailey Hongzhuang, you're just relying on your contract beast. Although this contract beast strength is not bad, it's impossible for you to reach the finals with just this contract beast. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was on her way out, Tan Lihan passed by Bailey Hongzhuang and said some harsh words unhappily. Instead of worrying about whether I can persevere, you should worry about yourself. Bailey Hongzhuang sneered. Tan Lihan snorted coldly and left. Xia Jiqing and the others came to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. After seeing Tan Lihan leave angrily, everyone was confused. Hongzhuang, what did that woman say? Xia Jiqing frowned. Today, they were all on the viewing platform and were quite a distance away from Bailey Hongzhuang, so they had no idea what had happened. Bailey Hongzhuang waved her hand. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude, Xia Jiqing and the others had already understood in their hearts. However, with the identity and ability of Bailey Hongzhuang, there was indeed nothing to worry about. White Lion, I haven't seen you in a while. I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Xia Jiqing touched Baishir's head. Baishir was really majestic now, and his fighting strength was really terrifying. In comparison, there was a huge gap between her Xiaofeng and him. Baisher rubbed his head against Xia Jiqing. He was still very familiar with Xia Jiqing, who had watched him grow up. Your wind spirit tiger's strength has also increased very quickly. Chapter 2234. The next day, the sky was clear and the wind was cool. The martial arts field was bustling with activity early in the morning. Many disciples had started betting on who would win. The odds were adjusted according to the disciple's strength. If the disciple was strong, the odds would be low. If the disciple was weak, the odds would be much higher. However, for the strongest disciples of the four branch palaces, this bet was not set up. This was because there was no suspense in their victory. Unless two of the strongest disciples of the two branch palaces clashed, there would be a different bet. Bailey Hongzhuang had checked her odds before the competition. She did not expect her odds to be in the middle. It seemed that everyone was optimistic about Baisher's strength. Just like the first day, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the number she had drawn. Number 3. I didn't expect to appear so early this time. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. This was good. After the competition ended, she could return to her sleeping quarters to rest. It seemed like only one day's time, but her strength would increase again. Yi Chenyu was still sitting beside Bailey Hongzhuang. After yesterday's competition, Bailey Hongzhuang already knew that Yi Chenyu was very strong. If she guessed correctly, Yi Chenyu would most likely enter the finals. Junior sister Bailey, your opponent today is White Tiger Palace's Guo Qiaoyan. Her strength belongs to the middle level of White Tiger Palace. Her cultivation is around the second level of Green Realm. She has more battle experience than LV Zhengyang. She is not easy to deal with. Yi Chenyu explained to Bailey Hongzhuang after seeing the number in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand. Compared to yesterday's preliminary round, it was harder to rely on luck in the second round. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Green Realm Level 2. This cultivation was already very strong. The further one cultivated, the greater the difference between each level. Thank you for the reminder, Senior Brother Yi. I will be careful. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. The third match, White Tiger Hall's Guo Qiaoyan versus Vermilion Bird Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly walked up to the high platform as soon as the referee finished speaking. At the same time, Guo Qiaoyan was already standing in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. The two women, standing opposite each other, immediately attracted the interested gazes of many disciples. Among the disciples who were participating in the finals, there were very few female disciples. The collision between these two female disciples was even rarer. Begin, said the judge without hesitation. Then, he left the fighting ring. Guo Qiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. The elemental energy of a level 2 Green Realm warrior burst out in an instant, filling the entire sky with a sense of suppression. Guo Qiaoyan is already at Green Realm Level 2. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast comes out, I'm afraid it won't be easy to win. The martial skills mastered by cultivators are much stronger than those of monsters. Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose this match. I also bet that Bailey Hongzhuang will win. I didn't expect her opponent to be Guo Qiaoyan. Some of the cultivators who had bet on Bailey Hongzhuang began to complain. This bet was all about cultivation resources. If they lost, it would not be an ordinary loss. In contrast, Xia Jiqing and the others who bet on Bailey Hongzhuang were not worried at all. Chapter 2235. The large fist enlarged in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang was not flustered as she raised her right fist to meet the attack. When the crowd saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had not allowed Baisher to make a move and had instead met Guo Qiaoyan's fist head-on, their eyes simultaneously filled with shock. Guo Qiaoyan's power had always been on the list in the White Tiger Palace. Bailey Hongzhuang was only a pill master. Was she not asking for trouble by doing this? When Guo Qiaoyan saw Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, a smile appeared in her eyes. She had thought that she would need to spend some time to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast. She never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would have no intention of letting her contracted beast attack, and instead wanted to meet force with force. In this way, The competition would end very quickly. Bang! The two fists collided with a loud bang, and energy ripples spread outwards. However, contrary to the crowd's expectations of Bailey Hongzhuang being defeated, Bailey Hongzhuang remained standing on the same spot. Her expression was calm, and she did not look injured at all. Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang in shock. Based on the power that had been transmitted from her fist, Bailey Hongzhuang was not the least bit inferior to her. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was also a powerful cultivator? When this thought appeared in Guo Xiaoyan's mind, she felt that it was rather inconceivable. How could Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation not be any weaker than hers? Even if Bailey Hongzhuang was not a pill master, she was still a new disciple. Bailey Hongzhuang did not give Guo Xiaoyan the chance to think. She rose to her feet once again, and her sharp fists exploded towards Guo Xiaoyan like lightning. Bang, bang, bang. The two figures flew through the air, and the wind from their fists was like thunder. In a short moment, they had exchanged more than 10 blows. When the two separated once again, Guo Xiaoyan's expression had turned extremely ugly. Her hands couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, she no longer doubted Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. This was because not only was Bailey Hongzhuang not weaker than her, she was even stronger. I didn't expect. I underestimated you. Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. She had never treated Bailey Hongzhuang as her opponent. Now, it seemed that she had underestimated her opponent. It's good that you don't underestimate him now. After Bailey Hongzhuang moved her muscles and bones, she felt a lot more comfortable. The demonic beasts in the desert world were all abnormally strong. In the process of cultivating in the desert world, her strength could be said to have increased rapidly. She had to fight with those monstrous demonic beasts almost every day. She hadn't fought for the past 2 days, so she wasn't used to it. The onlookers were completely dumbfounded when they saw that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was actually on par with Guo Xiaoyan's. Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang an alchemist? Why is she so strong as well? A new disciple who has already reached level 2 of the Green Realm. We can disembowel ourselves at any moment. It's a slap in the face. How would we have any dignity left? Since you're not weak, then I won't hold back. Guo Xiaoyan's voice was cold. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's strength had exceeded her expectations, she still didn't think that Bailey Hongzhuang would be a match for her. Please. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was calm. Even at this moment, she still looked as calm as ever. Ding! Chapter 2236. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her hand, and the glass sword immediately appeared in her hand. Azure Spirit Sword Technique. Guo Xiaoyan shouted coldly. The essence energy in her body instantly surged into the sharp sword in her hand, and a resplendent light emerged from the sword. Mystic Glass Sword. Bailey Hongzhuang's movements were not slow at all. She flipped her hands and condensed a seal, while the glass sword stood upright in the air. At this moment, everyone only felt that the essence energy in the air was frantically rioting. 2 terrifying auras swept out with the 2 as the center. In the air, 2 enormous swords quietly condensed, mixed with a frightening fluctuation. Bang! Monstrous elemental energy surged. 2 sharp swords that were over 30 meters long tore through the sky with extreme violence. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, they collided with a loud bang. At the moment of impact, a thunderous sound resounded through the sky, and an extremely violent energy swept out. Fortunately, the Tiangang sect's fighting stage had its own array. No matter how shocking the battle fluctuations on the fighting stage were, it would not affect the disciples and the spectator stands in the slightest. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure rapidly retreated. With a wave of her sleeves, she removed all the energy in her body. Guo Xiaoyan similarly retreated to the other side of the fighting stage. Looking at the 2 attacks that constantly corroded each other in the air, her eyes were gloomy and complicated. Bailey Hongzhuang's strength exceeded her expectations. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's calm and composed appearance until now, she felt increasingly uneasy in her heart. Bang! Another earth-shattering bang sounded. The two attacks turned into smoke and dissipated into thin air. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the mystic glass sword's effect and could not help but sigh. The Tiangang sect's disciples were indeed very strong. She actually did not achieve much effect. Guo Xiaoyan's face had an additional trace of paleness. Unless one looked carefully, one would not notice it. As a long-established expert of the White Tiger Hall, she actually fell into a disadvantage in the hands of a new disciple today. This was something that Guo Xiaoyan felt was simply impossible. If they were defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang's hands, they would really lose face. I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be so capable. Maybe I won't lose the bet and will even make a fortune. Bailey Hongzhuang really hid her strength well. Yesterday, when I asked the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples, they said that Bailey Hongzhuang completely relied on the strength of her contracted beast. Now, it seems that they were just talking nonsense. I've also heard this from Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Tan Lihan. Why is she spouting such nonsense? After a short collision, many disciples had already changed their direction. At the very least, the outcome of this competition was still uncertain. In the competition area, Tan Lihan's face had already turned purple. The strength that Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed today was truly a slap to her face. However, her heart was filled with disbelief. Normally, she had never heard of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Bailey Hongzhuang's ranking on the Pillar of Fame was also abnormally poor. She did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang's schemes to be so deep. She had purposely set up a trap to make people overlook her strength. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength in addition to her contracted beast strength, her battle strength was really not weak. Why don't we end this quickly and decide the victor in one move? Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, the pressure in her heart was incomparably great. If this continued, the only one who would be affected would be her. It looked like she had no choice but to use her trump card. Chapter 2237. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's hand seals swiftly flipped over. Vigorous yuan power whizzed out from her body, and a terrifying aura quietly appeared. Guo Xiaoyan had begun her actions almost at the same time as Bailey Hongzhuang. She knew very well that it would not be easy for her to enter the finals based on her abilities. However, she felt that she still had a good chance of entering the third round of the preliminary round. As long as she entered the third round, her abilities would be acknowledged by the palace master, and her future development would be smoother. After all, the top 20 in the entire Tiangang sect would be the top 5 in the branch palace. This had always been the goal that she had been striving for. When she saw that her opponent was Bailey Hongzhuang, she felt that her luck was very good and she would definitely be able to enter the third round. However, the situation before her eyes was very different from what she had imagined. If she were to be defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang, it would be better for her to be defeated by an expert who had been famous for a long time. Now, Guo Xiaoyan only felt that she had drawn the worst draw possible. Infernal Divine Palm. Guo Xiaoyan cried out loudly. The yuan power in her body whizzed wildly, and almost all of it surged into the martial skill. The crowd could only feel a wave of energy in midair. Soon after, a gigantic yuan power palm slowly appeared from the clouds. A terrifying and enormous energy spread out from the infernal divine palm, causing everyone's heart to palpitate and panic. After this martial skill appeared, Guo Xiaoyan's aura withered a little, and her face was also dyed with a touch of paleness. Looking at Guo Xiaoyan's performance, the crowd understood that this was Guo Xiaoyan's trump card. Once she had unleashed it, she would not be able to unleash any more powerful moves. Instantly, the crowd's eyes lit up. It seems that once this martial skill had clashed, the result of this round would be known. Sacred Green Flame Palm. Bailey Hongzhuang cried out coldly. Soon after, a gigantic palm, flickering with green flames, slowly appeared in midair. The two gigantic palms faced each other in midair from a distance. Both of them were filled with an extremely violent fluctuation, causing one to tremble with fear. If that's the case, then you'll definitely lose this competition. Guo Xiaoyan looked at the green palm in the air. Although the two palms looked similar, she could feel that her infernal divine palm was much stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang's azure flame sacred palm. Thinking of this, Guo Xiaoyan couldn't help but feel relaxed, as long as she could obtain victory. So what if she had to expend a little more effort? You've finished executing your martial skill, but mine hasn't. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, her hand seal quietly changed. In the next moment, under everyone's astonished gaze, the green palm in the air rapidly shrank. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current strength, using the azure flame sacred palm was no longer as difficult as before. Instead, it was a very smooth and simple matter. As the green palm shrank, its aura and flames rapidly increased. The aura it emitted was more than twice as strong as before. Guo Xiaoyan's pupils shrank as a thick sense of shock rose in her eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang's martial skill can actually change in this way. Most importantly, the outcome of this battle would be different. Let's end this competition. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.